I've chosen to explore our idea of Henry VIII through 3 films that explore Henry VIII's story. They're made roughly every 30 years since the talkies. So the first one is The Private Life of Henry VIII from 1933. Then we've got Anne of the Thousand Days from 1969. And finally, the television film Henry VIII from 2003. And in each one, I am considering what are the historical accuracies and inaccuracies that are present, what's the main message of the film, how is Henry depicted, what's the film's treatment of sex and gender, and what is symptomatic about the film as a sign of its generation. So let's start first of all with the private life of Henry VIII. This was made in the 1930s, as I said, 1933 it came out. And its director was the Hungarian-born Alexander Korda, who was later a naturalised British citizen. The cinematographer was French, he was Georges Perrenal. The writer was Laszlo Biro. And the star, as you've already seen, was Charles Laughton, this major screen and stage actor from England. At the time it was well reviewed. Variety said it was an ace, and certainly the finest picture which has come out of England to date. Laughton received the Academy Award for Best Actor for it in 1933, the first British feature film to receive any Oscar, and critical approval of his performance was almost unanimous. John Gamm in Film Weekly wrote this. He said, "This Henry VIII, played with tremendous gusto by Charles Laughton, is a Rabelaisian monarch whose connubial adventures and robust buffoonery entirely liquidate the dryness of a historical character." Simon Callow has more recently concluded it remains one of the greatest things he did and one of the most achieved performances in film history. It was shot in just 5 weeks. It cost £60,000, which was very little even then, and it earned £7,500 on its first day of admissions, breaking box office records. In its first week, it earned back more than half of its production cost, and it made £500,000 on its first world run. At the time, an unprecedented amount for a British film. It was still making nearly £10,000 a year well into the 1950s, and it was the first British film to conquer the American market. So even in filmic terms, this is a really important film. It launched the international careers of Merle Oberon, who played Anne Boleyn, and Robert Durant, who played Culpeper. And Oberon and her fellow queens were suddenly in great demand for product endorsements and advertising work. Lovely Merle Oberon chooses Potter and Moore's powder cream. The concept at the heart of it, in the title, it's there, is the private life of Henry VIII. And it's worth reflecting on why they chose to focus on Henry's private life. The truth of the matter is that it allowed Korda to ignore many historically important aspects of Henry's life. The political and religious changes of Henry's reign are outside the scope of the film. Instead, it concentrates on personal relationships, and it does so by treating history lightly, satirically, irreverently. Its style is comedic, burlesque even. It's farcical. There's plenty of innuendo. It can be very funny at times. For example, before he goes into the bedchamber after his marriage to Anne of Cleves, he turns to the court, to the camera, and says, "The things I've done for England." And the filmmakers are encouraging a degree of ironic detachment from the events that we're seeing. The dominant mood is one of excitement. Interestingly, Henry in this film is a sympathetic character. He is portrayed as the victim of manipulative women. 2 of the wives who don't fit this paradigm, Catherine of Aragon and Jane Seymour, are dispatched pretty quickly. Henry is depicted as vulnerable, tender, sentimental, as well as blustery and vulgar. His failed marriages are depicted as the fault of his wives. At one point, Anne of Cleves lists the flaws of his previous wives. Anne Boleyn's flaw is said to be ambition, Jane Seymour's flaw is said to be stupidity. And Henry is shown as a lonely, wronged man who doesn't want to marry for the sake of it, but does so again and again for the sake of his country, who just wants to be happy and loved like any other ordinary man. Some of this had a distinct social purpose in the 1930s. It suggests that Henry's life, that a king's life, is difficult and not worth envying. It's just a more burdensome version of an ordinary person's life. Kingship is a trial rather than a privilege. Let's go and have a look at one of these clips and you'll see just how that plays out.
Nobody won't touch it.
Why? Whatever's wrong?
Everything. He just sits and glares.
They're not trying to make him merry again. Oh, I'd like to see him after that German business.
After all, you can't say he hasn't tried.
Try too often if you ask me. Say nothing of the side dishes. A little bit of this, and a little bit of that. What a man wants is regular meals. Yes, but not the same joint every night.
Oh!
A man loses his appetite after 4 courses.
How do you mean, 4 courses?
He got into the soup with Catherine of Aragon, tried stinking fish with Anne Boleyn, cooked Jane Seymour's goose, and gave Anna Cleves the cold shoulder. God save him. It's no wonder he suffers in the legs.
Your Grace is sad tonight. What can we do to cheer your Grace?
What could you do to cheer my loneliness?
Your Grace is lonely. Now, that is the penalty of greatness, sir.
Greatness. I would exchange it all to be my lowest groom who sleeps above the stable with a wife who loves him.
Your Majesty, there is one matter, one most urgent matter. I scarcely dare to broach it. I would have waited for a happier moment, but it is so pressing.
What is it?
Your Grace, your whole kingdom most urgently implores you to marry.
Oh, no. Should I consent, it'd be only put down to desires of the flesh.
Oh, never, Your Grace. Your people know you too well.
That's what I mean.
Your Grace is pleased to jest. But the will of your people has always been your law. And Your Grace, they want this marriage to a man.
I'm not eager. If all my people wish it, what can I do? At least you have my promise to think it over.